Welcome to Permission to Be Human, the podcast. I'm your host, Mel Finlater, mother, coach, and curator of Permission to Be Human, the company and community. If you're a mom, know a mom, or want to be a mom, and you crave getting out in the world to make a difference, then you're in the right place. This is a space for moms like you to connect with yourself, your purpose, and your big, audacious dreams. Because when you feel your best, you can better you, your family, and the wider world. Let's do this. Hey everyone, we have Emily Cleghorn with us today, and she's a really interesting coach who specializes in trauma and motherhood. And it's a really interesting conversation we have today about her story and how we as moms who perhaps have had trauma in our lives at various points get triggered and are still healing, and how do we manage through motherhood with that. I want to give a quick trigger warning here because Emily does talk a little bit about the childhood abuse that she had. So if that is something that is going to make you feel unsafe or you're not in the right space for this right now, then please listen to it later if appropriate. And it's definitely not one for your kids to listen to, so keep that in mind. Emily Cleghorn is an award-winning trauma recovery coach, author, podcaster, and inspirational speaker on a mission to support trauma-surviving mamas to navigate triggers and tantrums as they heal their childhood trauma in the midst of parenting. It's not an easy thing, so having someone like Emily behind you is definitely necessary. And I really like how Emily shares her story in this episode about how her big audacious dream came from the challenges in her life and seeing that other people needed support just like she did. You can check out Emily at home.mendedmamalife.ca and on Instagram, emilycleghorn.coach. So please do go check her out. She has her own podcast too, Mama Untriggered. It is really, really interesting, and you'll actually find me on there very soon as well. So listen up. Okay, we have Emily Cleghorn with us today. Hi, Emily. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's so awesome to have you here. We met quite a while ago, but it's been kind of just we've been in our online spaces together in a variety of ways, and I've always been curious about your work around trauma, especially with mothers, and I think it's so important. So I'm excited to share your story, but also any tips you have around that for our crew today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here and to share a little bit of my story and um, how my overcoming can also be your overcoming.
Yeah, amazing. I know what that means, and I'm excited to dive in to help other people see what that means. So tell us a little bit about who you are. Who's Emily?
Well, I am the mom of two beautiful babies. I've married to my best friend, and I am a podcaster, an author, a coach, a former public school teacher. So, I'm a lot of things. I'm a farmsteader as well. I have a herd of goats, some rabbits and chickens and ducks, and living the country life.
Brilliant. I love it. I didn't know about the farmstead part. My son would love that. He's obsessed with chickens right now. Everything's chicken, chicken. And we were just in Hawaii actually, and there's chickens that just walk around in Hawaii, and it was like his dream. It was great.
Yeah, it's all good until you find a grouchy rooster and
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we learned to give them space because there's a lot of roosters there too. But oh, that's awesome. So I mean, those are a lot of your interests and your titles and your labels. I wonder what the next level of Emily is.
So I am a trauma survivor, and I'm really, really passionate about helping other mamas, new mamas, to navigate through the trauma freight train that tends to hit us. Motherhood is can be very triggering for a lot of people, especially trauma survivors, and it's it's an area of our lives that our society puts a lot of pressure on us, and there is it's not necessarily spoken pressure either. There's a level of unspoken pressure that exists around motherhood, and a lot of people, myself included, don't understand how their previous traumas, so for me it was childhood trauma, can impact how they show up in motherhood, and how the transition from I'm me to I'm so and so's mom. And it can be really complicated and complex and surprising because it surprised the pants off of me. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I know a lot of people would agree. I think every mother, it's such a big transition in our lives, and our history, whether that has big T traumas or not in it, is has made an impact on who we are right now. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Especially if you grew up in an environment where you weren't taught how to navigate your emotions, and your nervous system has been trained to live in a fight or flight response, and you don't know how to feel calm, because if you aren't taught as a child how to feel calm and there's no example of that, then when you're transitioning into motherhood, how on earth are you supposed to feel calm if you never learned as a child, right? So
Yeah.
it's it's an education of it's a journey of teaching yourself how to feel calm, and there's a lot of choice in there, and acknowledging and awareness. There's it's there's a lot.
Yeah, for sure. There's so much. And I really want to, in a little bit, I would love to hear more about what we can do with that.
Yeah.
But first, I'm really curious of your story of how did you get to this point where this is what you want to do in the world? This is the difference that you want to make. How did you get there?
All right. So I was raised, just a little bit of my backstory. I was raised by my paternal grandparents. My biological parents were in and out of my life. When I was 6 years old, my dad married a woman who had a son of her own. And at that point in my life, I was really close with my dad. So I wanted to go live with my daddy. And my grandparents said, "Yeah, sure, go live with your dad. That's where you're supposed to be." And it didn't take very long before I realized that it was the biggest mistake of my life. I lived with my dad and my stepmom and my stepbrother for about 18 months. And in that time frame, I was abused physically, sexually, mentally, emotionally, all the ways. And I I as a little girl, I was waiting for somebody to rescue me, and nobody was coming to rescue me. And so on weekends, I was sent off to spend the weekend with another family member because my stepmother couldn't handle the sight of me. And so one Sunday evening, my biological mom said, "Okay, Em, it's time to get ready to go back home." And something inside of my little 7-year-old body snapped, and I said, "I'm not going back." So I got my stuff packed up and I hid under my sister's desk and put my bag in front of me so nobody could find me. And that was the end of the deepest part of my trauma. The abuse has stopped, and I went back to live with my paternal grandparents, and I I didn't have any coping skills. And so much of my late elementary years, my teen years, my 20s were quite challenging. I dealt with anxiety, depression, feeling like I was the kid that nobody wanted and I was unlovable. I truly believed that I was a waste of space and that I was just born to be somebody's punching bag. And I know now that none of those things are true. But at that point, I had just accepted that my life was going to be hard, that I was doomed with this black cloud hanging over my head, and no matter where I went or what I did, that black cloud would persist. And I needed to do everything I could to hide that black cloud because that black cloud meant that I was broken and unlovable. And if people saw the truth of that black cloud, that they would they would leave me like my parents did. And so I managed I managed the black cloud. I went to university, got my teaching degree, my education degree, and moved across Canada. So I grew up in Nova Scotia and I moved across Canada as far away from home as I could. Got a teaching job and met the man that is now my husband. And I wasn't sure if I wanted kids because I didn't want to be responsible for hurting another human the way that I had experienced um, growing up in my family of origin. So, but he really wanted kids. So we compromised. I was like, okay, we can have one and then we're done. And so I was unaware at that point that all of my trauma was just waiting to come knocking on my door. And so I became a mom in September of 2018. And it it was maybe 5 days later when I was side railed by what I call the trauma freight train. And all of my trauma came flooding forward. And I was looking at my sweet little baby daughter who looked exactly like baby Emily, triggering, holy cow. And I was looking at her thinking, I do not want to be responsible for causing this sweet, innocent little baby the same grief that I have experienced in my life. And I I loved her more than anything, but everything inside of me was telling me to get the heck out of there because it was unsafe. It wasn't unsafe, but in my body, it was because of my experience with maternal figures. So I knew that if I listened to that voice and ran away, I was going to be repeating the cycle. I would have hurt my daughter, I would have hurt my husband, and I wouldn't have been able to live with myself. So, the other option that I had was to stay and figure it out. And those days, those months that followed, I suffered in silence for a lot of it because I thought that the way that I was feeling was made me a bad mom, made me a bad person because I hated being a mom.
Yeah.
Not because I didn't love my daughter, but because of what a mother represents in my brain. And I didn't want to tell my husband because I thought he would judge me and it would cause tension. And like I was a hot mess until one day we were driving home from buying groceries or something. And he's like, "What is going on with you? Like, why are you crying so much?" I was like, "I hate being a mother." He's like, "Well, okay. How do we fix this? Like, we've got this baby in the back seat. Like, what do we what do we do?" And I've got to figure it out. So that was the beginning. And I'm in those dark days, I made a promise to myself and to God. I said, "God, if you help me get through this, I will reach my hand back into the fire and pull out other mamas who are struggling with the similar feelings that I'm having because I know I'm not special enough to be the only one that has experienced this." And so little by little, I came out of the darkness. Things started to the clarity started to come about, and I began working through the mountain of issues that I was facing. The first was acknowledging that my daughter is not me and I am not my mother. I am my own person. I have the autonomy to make my own choices, make my own motherhood, and parent my daughter in the way that she needs me to parent her. And to believe that I could, to believe in myself that I could, you know, overcome this massive obstacle and be the mom for my daughter that she needed, that she deserved. And it's it's evolved from there. In 2020, just shortly before everything was locked down, my son was born, and that was another level of healing because my sexual trauma was at the hands of my stepbrother. So there was a lot of issues that I was unaware of that my son kind of brought to the surface. And it's interesting to see how my kids have helped my healing journey. I don't know that I would be in the same place without them. So I say that my daughter saved my life because she did. She woke me up. She served as my wake up call. Like, "Hello, Emily, wake up."
Yeah. I just want to breathe. I just want to leave
Yeah.
that in the space there for a second, actually. I think what's coming to my mind is like, wow. And and this kind of realization and recognizing that everybody's human journey, let alone our mothering journey, is so very different. And that yours has had some horrific past, which doesn't define having to have a horrific future, right? And
Absolutely.
the strength that I can hear in what you're saying is palpable. And in your knowledge now of like, I got this, and I'm going to make this difference in my kids' life, in my life, my family's life, but also in the lives of those who may have gone through something similar. And the question that comes to my mind is, in those dark days, as you call them, in the first days of motherhood, when you were kind of, that train came through and you're like, whoa, like
Mm-hmm.
thinking all these things that are terrifying you. I'm curious of what it was or who it was that really helped you to get through that, because when trauma happens, which essentially you are reliving a trauma in your mind then, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your
Yep.
body's in its fight and flight response. You're not necessarily capable of thinking in that moment, at least not logically. So I'm curious of like, how did you get yourself out of that state enough to be able to make a decision to stay and to move on?
I was really, what's the word? I was focused on finding the support that I knew I needed. So at that time, I lived in northern Alberta where services are limited, like limited. I lived I lived in the part of Alberta where you have to drive 4 hours to get to Walmart. So I was scouring the internet as much as I could to find the support that I needed. I
Mm,
became so focused on finding that support or finding a community somewhere of moms that I could rely on for support, because many, many days in that fourth trimester, not every day, but a lot of days, I it was all I could do to put one foot in front of the other. It was, okay, let's deal with our morning. Okay, let's deal with our afternoon. Let's deal with our evening. Let's deal with our nighttime. And I was really blessed to have a husband who was supportive. He was like, he wasn't able to get up with our daughter at night because I was breastfeeding, but he he would take her and he would help with what he could help with. And he would try and give me space. And we did a lot of research. At that point, we were diving into the world of natural supplements and essential oils and how those things work in the body and how they can help. And so I became so thirsty for knowledge, and that's what I focused on.
mm, yeah.
Educating myself, finding the support that I needed. And I was I was lucky to be connected with a really great group of women who were knowledgeable in like the essential oils stuff and motherhood and all of that stuff. So yeah, I was really lucky in that sense. However, there were days where it just felt so isolating, like I was the only one dealing with this massive pile of emotion. And so that was challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, what I hear there is this what moved you forward is the desire to find community and other
Yeah.
people and to know that you're not alone in motherhood and in these thoughts around motherhood.
Yeah.
And also the education, which is similar to that in some ways, of knowing that this is a thing, right?
Mhm.
It's not just you, it's a thing, right? Postpartum depression is a thing, and
Mhm.
trauma is a thing, and all the education of like, so what do I do about that, or what are my options and my choices?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not something that is uncommon. It's something that many women face, and our society has is it's getting better, but we still have a long way to go with offering mothers the postpartum support that they really truly need.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm curious, what would that like, what is the ideal support in that situation? What do you wish had happened or been available
Um,
for you?
I I would, reflecting on it now, I think postpartum therapy, like having a s- a therapist that specializes in postpartum mental health and the issues that come up around um, transitioning into motherhood would be invaluable. Like that would change the game for so many mothers, not just me.
Yeah. And to take away that stigma of one, what a therapist is, and two,
Yeah,
struggling in motherhood.
yeah.
Yeah.
I also think that a component to a therapy component to prenatal healthcare would also be huge,
Mm,
because a lot of the emotions and feelings that we face in postpartum from the trauma train coming up or whatever can be prepared for in prenatal or even family planning that could, you know, alleviate some of the pressure in postpartum and
for sure. Yeah. And
leave you feeling more prepared.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And kind of might raise some flags so that people can
Mm,
realize that they're more prone to this. So if you've had trauma in your past, I imagine there's probably research done showing that you're more likely to have postpartum depressive thoughts. And, like if we had a system that supported people during pregnancy to notice their past and to say, okay, well, these things might come up. What are you going to do about it? What's available to you? Like preemptively, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, we could just go and change the whole, healthcare system and by the end of this
Fun.
hour. Yeah. If only, right? But I think a big part of like I love that you're coming on here and both and in your work, you're sharing this story because as hard as it is for me and I'm sure our listeners to hear it, like I have very high sense of empathy. So I'm, like I can feel it in my heart when you were speaking, right? It's so important to hear
Hmm.
because there are so many people like you. There are
Yeah.
so many people with their own version of that story And whether it's big T trauma, which is what I would call like the abuse kind of side of things, or whether it's smaller T's that have happened throughout life, but you can motherhood can be so triggering.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
every day,
Yeah.
honestly. Yeah, and uh it's so hard and it's so challenging and it's so rewarding because it's growth. Like we're
Yeah.
forced into the growth. There's no
Yeah.
choice.
It's forced growth. Yeah.
There is choice. There's choices all
There
along.
is choice. There is choice.
Um,
You can choose to continue the cycle.
yeah,
You that that is a choice that you can make. Or you can
yeah,
choose to face the hard things that nobody else in your family line has made the choice to face, and you can say enough is enough and it stops here. Both of those choices are
yeah,
valid,
yeah,
but they're both valid.
yeah, totally. And those are choices, and we make little choices every single day in
Mhm.
relation to that. If we've committed to the one, to the growth side of that, then every day we make a small choice, a
Yeah.
gazillion small choices towards that. Yeah. And what's coming to my mind, so I'm literally like going through choices that I've made today in my mind as I spoke that, right? So like the frustration that I had in the morning at my child who like does not get dressed very quickly because getting to school on time doesn't matter to her.
Mhm.
And it matters to me and it matters to her dad who's had an appointment afterward and had to drop her off. And then the choice afterwards that I made to notice it, want to change that next time, and not spend the rest of the day feeling guilty about it,
Yeah.
right? And to instead be like, okay, what could I do differently? That's my trigger. How do I change that? How do I notice it? How do I, right? So our choices in terms of our actions, but also in terms of how we feel about the things that we're going to naturally do because of our who we
Yeah.
are and our past and our traumas and our what, right? Like we make those choices. Yeah. So, what do we do with this then? Like, what are you doing with this for yourself and for others?
So over the last 5.5 years, I have been navigating my healing journey, and I have curated what I call the Mended Mama method. And inside of the Mended Mama method, there are 4 pillars. All right. So, first, we have developing a trigger toolbox because, as we've said, mamahood is triggering. And the first part of healing is learning how to calm your nervous system. Because if your nervous system is not calm, then you can't heal. So, acknowledging what your triggers are, acknowledging the source of them, like where they're coming from, developing a connection within, because oftentimes as trauma survivors, we are not connected within because it feels unsafe, because you don't know if somebody's coming around the corner and you're going to need to protect yourself. Like, you need to be hyper vigilant as a trauma survivor growing up in some of those situations. So, developing a connection within, and a lot of people feel like that's really selfish, but it's not, because as a mama, your child or children are looking to you to model calm, to model how to work through certain emotions, how to work through sadness, how to work through anger, how to feel joy. And if you don't know, if you aren't connected within, and you're screaming and yelling and going on every time a loud noise happens, because a loud noise can be triggering, then your kids are going to adopt that. And every time a loud noise happens, you're going to start screaming and yelling and going on, and they're going to start screaming and yelling and going on. And the energy is just, it's going to elevate. So, and then developing communication skills and reflecting on your trigger, like you were saying. So I felt this because of this. I handled it in this way. Next time I could do this. And that is a practice that I verbally go through with my kids now that they're a little bit older. And I will say to them, if my trigger gets the best of me and I end up yelling or shouting or whatever, I will say, you know what, guys? Mommy didn't handle that situation very well. My nervous system kind of fritzed, and I shouldn't have yelled. I'm sorry that I yelled. Will you forgive me? Now, how could we handle that? How could mommy handle that different? And so it's modeling, acknowledging when you've hurt somebody else, because our actions do hurt our kids. They're little humans. They feel just like we do.
Yeah.
And they they get that exchange. And while I am healing, they we're learning at the same time. And then the second pillar, I help my clients cast a vision. So we know, oftentimes as trauma survivors, we know what we don't want. We don't want to be like our parents or whoever caused our trauma. We don't want to live that lifestyle. So as oftentimes it's hard for trauma survivors to dream beyond what they don't want. They know what they don't want. They don't know anything else. So it's hard to come up with something you're unfamiliar with, right? So, okay, so what's the opposite of a parent who is absent? What's the opposite of a parent who yells and belittles and, you know, all of those types of behaviors? And then focus on creating that opposite. So, what are some steps that you could take to become a more calm parent? What are some steps that you could take to become a more attentive parent, a more present parent, and casting the vision of what they do want, and making little tiny micro steps that are easy to achieve and attainable, because so often we have this we can have this grandiose vision of what we want, and then we don't know how to take action on it. And it's great to have a dream, but if you really want it and you want to make it a reality, you have to take action. And then I help my clients through the stepping stones, and I outline those in my book, Rising from the Ashes. And then we work on improved relationship connections. So much of the work that I do with mamas is very mama focused at first. And then once you're calm, once you're good, then we focus on turning externally and your relationship with your spouse and your kids. And if your family is still in your life, how your relationship is with them. because we can't control other people. It doesn't mean that their actions that they took to cause harm are okay. It doesn't validate them or justify them, but we can control us. We can control how we react and how we interact with them if we choose to, if it's safe to. So that is the broad stroke of what I do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I think what really comes to mind is everything you're describing is the title of this podcast, right? It is permission to be human. And,
Yeah.
it's permission to dream. Yep. But it's also permission to make mistakes. And
Mhm.
then this kind of process to growth through mistakes, because that is how we
Yeah.
grow, right? So,
Mhm.
after school, I will talk to my kid and I will say just similar to what you said, right? Be like, look, like worry was in the room with me this morning. I really,
Mhm.
it took me over and I didn't know how else to react. And then what can we do? What can we do with this? Like, what could I do next time? And I think it's a really interesting kind of concept to have our children in this kind of collaborative experience instead of authority to, you know, underling. And if that's the parent we're choosing to try to be, then it's in those moments that we actually show it. So mistakes are
Yeah.
great then if we can follow through afterwards with talking about it. And it's really stinking
Well,
hard to
oh, yeah. Yeah. I
do.
mean,
Right?
when I was in the classroom full time, I would tell my students, mistakes are okay. It's okay to not get 100% on your assignment.
Yeah.
Those mistakes are learning opportunities. Like
Yeah.
if you get it all right, then where where in there are you going to learn how to be better?
Yeah. Yeah.
So mistakes are learning opportunities. They're not failures. They're learning opportunities.
Yeah. And if our kids see us never make mistakes, then when they make a mistake, it's the end of the
Yeah,
world,
yeah.
right? I'm thinking of an example of like, so my son, I signed him up for T-ball and I know he'll love it and I know he'll be very good at it. And he has, like me, we have natural born talent in sport. We're capable of doing something without trying that hard. Not necessarily to the great extent, but to the like, we can be good at stuff, right? But what that means is he watches me, say, play soccer or do whatever, and he just thinks I already, like, he didn't watch the journey to get there. He just thinks, like, that's
Yeah.
how I've always been able to do it, and I never make a mistake. So he's like, I don't want to play. I'm
Mm,
like, oh, but then the next question, literally 5 seconds later, is how do you hold the bat? Is it like this? And he's swinging it, but he's doing it in a like anxious, like, what
yeah.
if I could do it wrong way? Everybody's watching, right?
Mhm.
And I've been like reflecting on this today because this was just last night. I'm like, okay, how do I show him that, like, what can I do that's
It's
wrong?
not perfect at first.
That's not perfect. And just show him that actually, like, that was really hard and I had to figure it out. And eventually I got good at it.
Yeah.
So I might have to try a new something just to
Mm,
just to show him that. But anyways, I'm sidetracking a bit, but I think this it what the theme that comes out of that is our relationship to ourselves, which is where you really honed in on first, and then our
yeah.
relationship to others, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the way that you do that sounds wonderful. It's really interesting. The lady I just interviewed, she'll be out in a couple of weeks' time on the podcast, probably just before you, Caitlin. has a similar, talks about a first aid kit, a mental health first aid kit. I think you'd get on very
Mm-hmm.
well because she describes very similar approach to things. And that's because that's what works. We got to go inward
Yeah.
first. We got to look at ourselves, and then we can look outwards at other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How can you teach your kids something you don't know,
Yeah.
right? How can you support your kids from an empty cup?
Yeah. Yeah. For
You got
sure.
to fill yourself up first. It's like when you're on an airplane and they say if the airplane crashes, you have to put on your oxygen mask first. Well, it's the same kind of deal. Like if you go and put your kid's oxygen mask on first and that plane goes down, you're going to be in the middle of the aisle and everybody's going to be walking over top of you.
Yeah. And I am guessing if that situation was to ever happen, my instinct would not be to put mine on first,
No,
right?
no, it wouldn't.
And so we have to notice that and decide to put our own on first, right?
Yeah.
Because it gives us the air we need
Mm-hmm. To help
to
our
make a
kids.
better decision to help our kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So as we start to wind up our conversation, what would you say are, people are listening to this, probably some that have had, well, we've all had histories and we've all had past, and some may have had the small t traumas, some may have had some of the big T traumas. What would you say to the people listening in that would, I'm rephrasing my question here. I'm just going to say this out loud because normally my question is, what do you say to the moms who have big, audacious dreams or want to have them? And I think for you, maybe the question is the same, but it's like the level before because we can't dream
Mm-hmm.
until we sort ourselves out, right?
Yeah.
So my question is, what is my question? What's your top tip to moms who are listening who perhaps have gone through some trauma and are feeling traumatized by motherhood
Mm-hmm.
in order to move forward and start to flourish in their own life for themselves and their family?
Okay, so this is an analogy that I often use. You don't take your car to McDonald's to get an oil change. So be careful with the community that you surround yourself with as you begin to heal. Community is crucial in healing. I mean, you can do it alone. I don't recommend it because it's hard. Healing trauma is not easy. Mamahood is not easy. So find yourself a community of mamas who have decided to heal their trauma, who can support you on your journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
That support is going to be the make or break decision that you have. Because if you have that community, then on those days where you feel like throwing in the towel and not seeing the healing journey through, you've got a baseball team behind you holding you up when you can't hold yourself up.
Yeah.
And I think everybody faces moments like that in motherhood where, your kid's going through a developmental leap or phase and it's just hard. Life gets hard. And having that community is huge. So find yourself a community, whether it's girlfriends locally that you can connect with, or a book club for moms, or a Facebook group. Be careful with Facebook groups because not all are healing focused. Some are just there to commiserate with each other. But, you know, community comes in so many different forms, and it's huge. We were designed to be in community.
Yep. Agreed. I love that. I couldn't have said it better myself. That being the top of my value list is that we're not meant to do this alone. We're
No, we're
meant,
not.
and this means literally being human
Yeah.
and certainly not being a mother. So yes, go find that community. And am I right in thinking you have a community people could join if they're looking for that safe place to?
Yeah, I do. So my community is not on social media. It is off of social media for safety purposes. And so you can find that on my website or in the description of any of my podcast episodes. So I host the Mamahood After Trauma podcast, and the link to the community is in all of the show notes. So
Brilliant. And what's the community called?
it's the Mamahood After Trauma Insider Circle.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you for being real, for showing up as your whole self and sharing that with a group of strangers because so much of this is not talked about, and it is only through having these conversations that people will start to feel less alone and
Mhm.
be able to then step out and find that community that they need to grow past it and through it.
Well, yeah. Thank you for allowing me to share. I am committed to having those conversations that nobody else wants to have. So, thank you for giving me that space.
That is it, folks. This has been Mel Finlater on Permission to Be Human, the podcast. And I am so glad that you have joined us here today and hope that you have taken away some tidbits that will help you go away, connect with your big, audacious dream, and make that massive impact in the world that you are dying to make. If you liked today's episode, please, please, please like it, share it. Think of one person. Think of one person that you think would also like it and send it on over to them. Let's get this out there and more moms feeling like themselves, inspired, dreaming big, and out there being them. Please do head on over to find me on Facebook with Permission to Be Human, or Instagram, or you can even pop me an email and say hello at permissiontobehumanalways@gmail.com. Say hello and let me know that you listened. What did you like about it? I would love to hear. If you didn't like it, I don't really want to know. Just kidding. You can share that if you want. I would love to know, however, who you are. Let's connect. Let's find out what you want more of. I want to hear from you, and I want to make it what would be useful to you. As always, remember that you have permission to dream big, permission to feel big, and permission to be you. You have complete and full permission to be human. For real, you do.